Well, hello everybody. Welcome to part 7 of Mountain Sing with Jessie. And I hope you're all having a wonderful Sunday. It's really an amazing time, and I must say I'm loving this. I didn't actually listen to the last recording yet, so I must go back and listen to that. But I'm really enjoying this, Jess. So
Yeah.
without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you.
All right. Well, let's start in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this morning and what a beautiful day. And we thank you that all of the little details you embellish the day with that we are to enjoy, that are there just for our pleasure and our delight. And we ask that you would bless our time together, bless our airwaves, our technology, our equipment. And we ask that as we read this book, Lord, we thank you for those throughout history who have taken the time to capture their words in books so that their words are lasting words, words that still encourage and lift us up today. So we thank you for that in Jesus' powerful name.
Amen.
Yeah, so the interesting thing with all of this, or we'll just say last week, what we ended off with, we're in the chapter called We Followed the Fisherman. And in that chapter, they met Mr. Sosa, who was going to take them to one of the Philippine islands. And he was a fisherman, and they talk about things like his boat, um, which it's hard to understand the exact shape of the boat, but they use terms like prow, which, is kind of like a pointed, um, uh, you know, front part of the boat that's going to be going over the water. So, kind of how I imagined the boats was that you just have a whole bunch of flat pieces of wood all tied together, but they may have, been looking a little different. So, um, Joy and Anne are out with Mr. Sosa on the water. They end up stopping by area where there's lepers and ministering to the lepers. One in particular who he had a beautiful song that he would sing, and in that she writes that there was just so much joy. His heart was full of joy, and the concept that someone can be in so much pain, so much rejection, so much desertion, and uh, separated from society, and yet can have so much hope and joy. And so that's kind of where we pick up on today on page 196. And she says, "Indeed, this was rejoicing when lepers could sing, not only of comfort, but of gladness. And as I placed before them the cry of unreached places, inaccessible for the feet of the evangelical, where records in the tribal languages could go, they, with the leisure from themselves that freed their hearts, were eager to embrace this new opportunity." So they took their record players with the gospel to some of the leper villages, and they pledged themselves to accompany through prayer these records in hundreds of languages to the dwelling of darkness throughout the earth. Not finding Mr. Bochnam of Culion, we embarked again by our private launch to try to find him at the port of Concepcion on the other side of the Basunga Islands. After picking our way over the coral reefs to the shore, we walked interior by the path, which was a majestic colonnade of tall coconut palms, and then to the perfect gem of the village, looking as though it had been designed by a landscape artist. Its lanes were natural avenues of palm trees and hedged about by tropical vegetation. Its 2 or 3 neat unpaved streets were lined with nipa houses, flowers in the yards, and here and there a shop or place of trade. Mr. Bochnam is not on the island, they told us. Our hearts sank, and Mr. Sosa was disconcerted. At least we don't think he is, they added uncertainly. He is the only informant I know of whom can help you, Sosa spoke decidedly. I believe I'll send a runner to his rice fields, 8 kilometers from here anyway. We must find him. As the runner went, we occupied ourselves with such things as siesta on rattan wooden beds of Philippine mahogany, a cool, refreshing drink from the shells of young coconuts, and a walk along the shore. These silent moments opened out into the sea of thoughts, prayer thoughts, pouring out in the serious urgency of his beginning of our search for languages in Palawan. It was nearly evening when our runner returned, and with him was Mr. Bauckham and his wife, who had consented to go with us to Coron. We straightway started back to the launch. The tide was so low now that we must wade out the distance of a city block to reach a depth suitable to float the banca. In the banca, we rowed toward the setting sun, edging the fantastically shaped mountain islands and spreading a covering of liquid rose and gold on sky and sea. We were enveloped in its glow, and there beyond us stood a black scepter-like boat, still and stolid, awaiting our arrival. But best of all, with us was our mediator, Mr. Rostito Bauckham, through whom the gospel could be prepared and given to many who were inhabiting the island places which even now were enveloped in darkness. The night was clear and still, and the full moon began to draw a wide luminous avenue across the smooth sea. How wonderful our God is! I talked to the young man, the nephew of Mr. Sosa, who had helped us so faithfully on this trip. He listened eagerly. The night seemed to bring us to touch the garments of the one who made it. Fishermen brought their boats full to shore at the word of his power. I thought aloud, and the disciples who had wanted to catch fish found that their nets were breaking. Yet immediately they forsook them. Boats, nets, fish, they left it all. Why? No wonder they had found the source of the miracle. If they had Jesus, he could do that again any time, and there was no need, and so much more besides. Just think what it means to have him, the Master, the Creator. Without him, nothing was made that is made. How foolish for us to fret or worry of such a one by our side. The lad seemed eager to relinquish his claims upon himself and to follow Christ, but he chose instead to remain just almost persuaded. Too soon we were winding between the shoals and the back into Coron. Since the tide was out too far now to tether our launch on our own back porch, we glided into the town dock and anchored there. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday morning, Calamiano and Cuyanan, or that's a Cuyanan, recordings were accomplished. But now, without equipment troubles, my diary suffered its pages to carry the words. Now that we have started at last to make records, we are having a time with the recorder. It sounds wavy at times, then clears up again. So far again from technicians, we can't go back to Manila. While Anne works on a song translation, I fiddle with the machine. The trouble may be in the large battery. It gets chills and fever or something. All of this was a foreshadowing of the severest trials we were yet to encounter, underscoring the crisis factor in our Palawan experience, which would culminate in an SOS sent out to our entire ancestry prayer team list in the States. It alerted them with the message. In November, our visitor's permit expires, and we will be returning to the States. We still have scores of languages to record. scores of tribes to reach, and at the present rate of working we cannot finish, and it breaks our hearts. Through your prayers, we believe the Lord will do a miracle and enable us to do the impossible. Maybe workers here in the Philippines will be raised up to help us so that we can work simultaneously. Or perhaps missionary technicians from the States will come out to carry on the task. The need is desperate. Hundreds and thousands of souls are involved. We must work fast while the way is yet open. Let us stand together in the words of Psalm 56:9. When I cry unto thee, then shall thy enemies turn back. This I know, for God is for me. Sunday evening was to be, as we thought then, our last night in Quran. Tomorrow we would finish our work and catch the boat of Porto Princess or Princessa, or sorry, that's Princessa? I think it is. We know it. We scheduled to leave at 11 a.m. We were already packed with little more to do, but confident that we could not sleep. Anne and I talked about the future. There were the pressing calls to us from the islands of Indonesia, from the tribal frontiers of Malaya, Indochina, Siam, and the need of tribes in New Guinea, of Aboriginal Australia, to say nothing of the cry of the larger continents, Africa, South America, Amazonia, and India. We talked of a recording team to go out on our next field trip so that one or two could go ahead and tarry behind according to the circumstances. We talked of the possibility of branching out into more planned field recordings by missionaries as their boards could direct them in cooperation with us. This would mean working together on a larger scale to get the original recordings for records which would be processed through our facilities. We thought of simultaneous field recordings around the world. We thought of the speed required now to push the good news into the last pagan frontiers. This would be a race with time, and with the fast recording areas of possible missionary endeavor in a world darkening into new and bigger political perplexities. Yet even so, we could expect the triumphant fulfillment of Matthew 24:14. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, peoples, and then shall the end come. We felt excited, too excited to sleep in the taking hold of this great prophecy. It can be done. Within a decade, we will. Every last tribe on the earth will hear the gospel of the kingdom. We did not see it then, but here in Quran, our first Palawan endeavor, threads were beginning which would be woven throughout the whole pattern that was Palawan. There was weather and the miracle of diverted storms, equipment trials and the miracle of retrieve, of time and of talent in the last minute, God's unhurried last minute being sometimes days beyond ours, and the uninteresting threads of the sitting still, doing nothing. These were to be present throughout the whole cloth, and the bright threads of missionary and Filipino hospitality and the uttermost cooperation. The exotic beauty lavish around us of sea and jungle mountains, of palm strands and fishing fleets, of voyages too many ports to call, all of these threads began to warp and woof that would finish the striking consistency of yardage and our third missionary journey. There was to be one dominant thread of a color I cannot tell exactly, because on one side it always seemed the picture of calamity, while on the other it inevitably wore the aspect of divine wisdom, and so markedly that it was this thread which predominantly betrayed the designer of the entire weaving, which was the Palawan recording trip. This particular thread first appeared crazy to us when we saw it underside in the following incident of Monday morning. We were waiting for the jeepney their Jeep, to take us to the dock ahead of time when we looked up to see our ship passing, heading out towards the open sea. It was the boat we should have been on, and it had left ahead of schedule. Our work at Koran was finished. We were ready to go. Shocked with disappointment, we watched it leave out of sight, and it seemed that we saw time slipping by, escaping us with all its precious cargo of opportunities, the wealth of hours and days, leaving us standing on the empty shore under a graying sky, just standing with nothing to do. But sing, yes, sing we must, although the song would lift itself on laden wings in sheer, unfeeling faith that above the floods gathering on the thunderheads above us, the sun was still shining. We could not have known at this time that it would be the fate of this ship that we had missed to be struck by lightning in the sea at storm. At Koran, we were to watch the tides go and come about 20 more times, and the rains were continual except for brief intermittent sunshine, when we could open the shutters and let light pour into our little room. Our walk out on the streets to see giant clamshells, some of them 3 feet high. Sometimes from next door we would hear above the rhetorical Candace the Tagalog speaking, and the exquisite bit of classical music like Beethoven's Emperor Concerto. Incredibly stateside, it was a sweet breath of home in a faraway bamboo cottage by the sea. We felt that the tide was far out, and we should be hurrying, yet we must wait and let our hearts be still. If in these days we may not serve, we may yet worship, we may offer sacrifice of praise that is rejoicing evermore. Is service preeminently important? If so, why should it be so often hindered? We have observed the cutting short of the life when it seemed ready for its fullest service. We have seen a talented young life laid upon the couch of helpless invalidism. And also, in very minor affairs, we've seen the allowance of delays upon the very brink of urgency. It must be that praise, glad and free and holy unto God, is more important to Him than anything else we should offer Him. What He wants most is the worship and the adoration of our hearts. Fairest Lord Jesus, ruler of all nature, O Thou of God and man the Son, Thee will I cherish, Thee will I honor, Thou my soul's glory, joy, and crown. The hymn of the Crusaders had become the atmosphere of our waiting days at Koran. When the moon waned, we would watch the fishing fleets go out at sunset, tugged in single file, each graceful prow bearing its own color and insignia, the sails down to the masts and tied by ropes and oars, 8 on each side of the long canoe, dipping up and down in perfect rhythm, flashing in the glow of the setting sun. At the head of each flotilla of a dozen boats, there would be a motor launch like that of Mr. Sosa's to tug them out between the two island promontories, which were like a doorway into the bay, or out to the fishing fields into the open sea. And there the slender boats cut themselves adrift and unfurled their sails for fishing all night under the stars, until next morning, when again they would link on one another to be towed back into their harbors. And at last the evening of Saturday, August 5th, came when we were aboard the inter-island steamer. Dotting the waters around us was the docks there in Tobago. Rafts with their small bucket cargoes of purple and blue, red plaid and spotted fish. Some of their slim rafts were crafted beside our boat, and the native fishermen were standing straight up, balancing themselves like acrobats on the bobbing logs, to offer some of their biggest fish for sale to the ship's commissionary. Many fish were brought right out of the weathered brown hands of the Tabangus. We felt like calling out to them the good news that we had prepared something for them, but knowing that they could not understand us, we had to keep our happy secret to ourselves until the records would be sent back to tell them the gospel in their own language. And now, as we came slowly out into the bay, we were following the evening fishing fleets going out to sea. There were several flotillas of them, converging at the gateway to the ocean. Fascinated with watching these beautiful praos with their S-shaped prows and the look of pirate boats to the old Moro tradition, we presently gained upon them, having ourselves passed between the island pillars and out into the Pacific, plowing our way towards Puerto Princesa. Desolate village. And she starts, this is chapter 22. She starts with Ecclesiastic 6:6. Yea, though we live 1,000 years twice told, yet we have seen no good. We came upon it unexpectedly right out into a wide open field close by the jungle. But there it was, a primitive Batak village in the bare, dusty center of the clearing of the tough Congan grass. The whole circle of short-legged, low-tattered huts was in plain view, and in the center was a large communal house standing in the same rugged mood of dilapidation. Mr. Alivor, our vivacious Filipino guide and would-be interpreter, adjusted his sun helmet and stamped off the drying mud of his army leggings. He looked like a Boy Scout on a field trip. Anne and I wore high-topped rubber boots that were muddy too, but we were bareheaded and wearing nylon seersucker skirts and cotton blouses. The three of us had taken a bus from Puerto Princesa to the end of the road, getting off of Babayan, which proved to be nothing but a tiny Filipino inn called the Rest House. And there we had followed our guide into the jungle, down slippery banks, across streams, and through tangled paths, until we had come out upon the view of Bangkok village, which we had been hoping to find. And here it was. But as we came close to it, we found that nobody was there. Could everyone be out working? But no signs of life anywhere. Not chickens, nor dogs, nor a single rice basket, or an earthen jar, or water, or beer. The communal house was empty except for a swarm of flies buzzing around a spot of grease where only the odor of refuse was left. There was not a sound except now when the peculiar hiccoughing croak of a gecko, a large lizard. The village was deserted, an empty shell that mutely described the desolate life that once inhabited it. They have moved away, Mr. Avalor said in dismay. We knew that this was a habit of the fast dwindling tribe who were the aborigines of Palawan. Numbering now only about 800, Negrito in origin, they were nomadic people. Their strong tribal instinct had made them cling pathetically to one another. They would move the entire village from planting to planting as the time suited them. The jungle forest, with its uses ready to their hands, made their construction of grass-roofed shacks a matter of 2 weeks' work. We noticed that the huts in the empty village were only half finished. Platforms with 1 or 2 walls and roofs heaped with nipa and grass that had made them likely nests for chickens or rats and other creatures that we did not like to think about. We saw 3 bats fly out of the top of the communal house, and making a swift, dizzy circle, they disappeared behind one of the farthest hovels. Here is an overgrown path, our guide shouted from the far edge of the village. Let's follow it. Maybe they did not go very far. I doubt it, but we might be able to find them. We followed Mr. Avalar across the field and began to climb a barren hill. We were hoping to locate the barrio lieutenant who would be one to secure the likeliest native interpreter for Bantock records we planned to make. He had left we had left our recording equipment at the farmhouse back on the gravel road. There was no shade on the hill, and the forenoon heat took the starch out of us. I sat down on the rock to rest, just halfway up the hill. Would they have gone miles away? I wondered, but surely we must find them. There it is, Mr. Avalor shouted from the hilltop and pointed as he looked down the opposite slope. Right down there is a village on the bare slope of the hill, he announced, as we came planting to the crest to look over. Surely enough, it was another group of huts near the bottom of the hillside. We could see no communal house in this one, however, and the half-housered, short-pegged huts were scattered here and there without any systematical pattern. There were no trees for shade anywhere, but instead a wilderness of tall grass and rampant weeds. We waited for Mr. Avalar to make way for our visit among the timid little folk he would find at home in the tattered barrio. And at his signal, he descended the hill and came into the Baytalk village. A skinny pig was rooting around a clump of tough grass, and 3 small chickens pecked at bits of rubbish on the ground between the clutter of the poor huts. As we passed one of these squalid dwellings, we noticed a listless dog that stared at us, too inert to wag his tail or bark. We walked close to an open shack where a woman, naked to the waist, um, stood over husking rice. She stopped often to scratch her flabby arms that were covering with scaling skin. Bad dogs have double skin, was the statement that we now understood. So many of them were afflicted with ringworm due to the filth in which they lived. Somehow the sadness that had touched our hearts with our first sight of the empty village deepened now with the desolation we felt as we came into this one. The woman's face haunted us. The youth that should have been there, for she was not really an old woman, had grown old and weary before its time. Her hair from her forehead to the crown of her head had been shaved off, and her expression was like that of one who has been too long in a prison cell. Was it just the odd effect of the hairstyle? But no, the young girl without the shaved off um, hair who was weaving a basket in the same little straw-like hovel, wore that dull, forlorn look also. What must be the life of this people? I thought of the color of the warmth and the comfort of my own life and the pleasant times in the missionary home of Walter Binney's, where we were staying in Puerto Princesa. And here, so close to us out in the fields, yet untaken for God, there were these people who were the children of desolation. They were min-mished and brought low through oppression, affliction, and sorrow to wander in the wilderness where there was no way. Psalm 107, 39, and 40. We did not find many people in the village. Only a few women seemed to be around. They were not unfriendly, but very shy and undemonstrative. Some of them allowed us to take their pictures, and we made one of 3 of them standing side by side, dressed in their costume of a shirt, heavy bronze anklets, and crude necklaces. Around their naked waists were coils of highly glossed rattan, which they could tighten during the famine days. 2 of these women also wore with their hair shaved to the crown. This we learned was to indicate that they were unmarried. One of them, the youngest, had thick hair that fell in a disheveled mass around her face. They could have been pretty, but for the lack of luster expression of unspoken famine of spirit. We tried to get them to smile, but when a hint of laughter showed around their mouths, Their eyes were still dark veiled like a lost soul looking dimly out through hopelessness. We learned that the youngest woman of the three, the one whose head had not been shorn, had been stolen from her first husband, but he had been quickly pacified by the ransom for her, the total sum of one crockery plate. How would it feel to be valued at the price of a plate? Someone managed to call a young man in from a nearby rice planting, and he consented to guide us to the home of the burial lieutenant. Some distance from the native village, his house was built more like those of a lowland villagers, and we found him at home. Could he suggest anyone from the Batak burial who could help us? We waited in the little yard while our native guide went away to contact the possible Batak spokesman for us. Dubious about the outcome of this, we were not in a talkative mood as we sat on the long bench. We were thinking of the shocking destitution of these unwanted, unloved people, shorn and desolate. What was that ornate little bamboo shrine in the front of the official's house? We asked someone, and they told us that it was a spirit altar. Then we knew why it was covered with garlands of flowers. These were peace offerings to the evil spirits. But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for the prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith, Restore. Isaiah 42:22. Let me read that one more time. That was really good. It says, But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith, Restore. Isaiah 42:22. An hour later, we were a raft load, the three of us, plus the burial lieutenant and Batak guide, and a native spokesman he had been able to bring to us, floating slowly downstream on a wide river. The tall trees and the jungle shoots on either side were like high green cliffs, sometimes arching out of the blue sky above us. Families of monkeys chattered in the trees or swung noiselessly from limb to limb along the banks. The scene was full of extravagant, with such abundant beauty it seemed unreal. What a contrast this was to the desolate village of the Bataks. Yet the contrast pressed the image of the unloved people even more heavily upon our hearts. In a short time, the raft was tied to a stump on the river bank. We scrambled up to the steep path, made our way out to the underbrush into the field skirting the rest house, miles down the dusty country road, until at last we were situated for a work at the farmhouse porch. Underneath us was literally the barn, which added prosperous sounding interest and a local color to the background of our first Batak recordings. When the day was spent, we had it not finished, but our Batak spokesman, wearing shorts instead of the more native attire, promised to bring another helper in the morning. And we agreed to meet them halfway by going down to the rest house. The next morning early we watched for them from the tiny wooden porch of the the rest house. We had almost missed this appointment ourselves because our only possible bus had rumbled by while we were still at the breakfast table. It had done no good to rush out with our intrepidation. The run down the wide fenced-in field of the Filipino farm to watch the last dust of the bus disappear far away down the road. But presently a truck had come along in this usually deserted road, and as we reached the place, agreed upon it plenty of time. We would be really, but would they really come? The monkeys were chattering in the nearby woods, and once in a while they jumped out into the plain view, blinking beady little eyes in our direction. We had not watched long in the direction of the river before we saw the Bataks emerging from the jungle hedge into the clear field. There was our friend wearing shorts and following him out of the jungle. We were astonished to see Batak in his native attire. Coming towards us was this dark brown, kinky haired little person with wonderful physique, wearing the usual bark G string and carrying the native bow and arrow. His stiff bark G string knotted at the back gave the effect of a tail trimmed in the proud fusion of the show horse on parade. At 2 o'clock, the last bus arrived at this road's end place, and we must leave. Although the kindly bus driver waited 30 minutes for us to finish up the last Batak recording. God wants the Batak people. His ransom for them is great. His ransom is Jesus. Jesus delivers anyone calling upon him. We watched our little dark brown friends leave, and they were apparently satisfied with the gifts they carried away, sugar, salt, medicines, and with a few yards of red cloth for which they had traded the bow and arrow. But they did not realize they would yet be receiving another gift, which we owed to our desolate village too long. Mr. Avalar said to us as he watched them leave, I feel that I must not fail to hike out regularly to these people. They must have help, and we were to discover later that these were not just words. Mr. Avalar would be the one to leave the phonograph among these Batak people, and the message of the heritage for the desolate ones. Job 33:27 and 28. God looketh upon men, and if any say, I have sinned, he will deliver his soul from going into the pit, and his life shall see the light. Next chapter, lines stretched out to breaking. Before we go on, I want to just take a moment to process that one just a little bit. It was interesting that she talked about, that sheer desolation and just how you have this people that, you know, it seems like time after time that desolation just doesn't stop. It continues to hit. And, how hard that must have been for them to see all that, to see the hopelessness, the helplessness, and yet, um, there's nothing that they could do, to have to walk away from people in that situation, and all you can do is pray. And um it reminded me of my stint when I was in the Portland area working as a chaplain at like a major trauma hospital. One of their parts of the hospital was the burn unit. And in that, they not only service people who have severe burns, but also they do extensive wound care. And, in that I saw methods that just defied, anything that you could imagine. It was like, how in the world, what do people have to endure um, just to be able to live? And, there would be so much desolation within that, because people earnestly, they didn't know if they would live through or not. They're in such a critical stage that, you know, every every last ditch effort is being applied. And I can remember even doctors at times, would have the discussion about, if this doesn't work, we don't think this individual's going to survive. Um, but it's interesting as those who minister to those people, because you have to, your heart is always to do something, to leave something, to give something. But at times there comes that honest truth that sometimes there's nothing else you can do. Like you can't do anything, and you have to leave with that unresolved in your heart. So I was just curious if some of that resonated with anybody else, and if any of you had experiences that were similar to things like that.
Actually, I was on a mission trip one time and went to Lima, Peru. And during that mission trip, we visited a leper colony, which they've discussed in the book this morning. And that leper colony, all the people there were so joyous and happy to see us. Just a strange group of people coming in, but they hardly ever got any kind of anyone that came by to say hello to them. And those people were so joyous and so excited about life. And yet they were living in desolation without arms, without limbs, without fingers, ears, noses. I mean, just hard to see visually, but their hearts were so open and joyous. And yet there was nothing to be done for them because they had been placed in a colony outside of the world. No one come in to see them. And yet they were so satisfied and content in that condition. But yet they lived in desolation. They lived in a place of hardship, in a place where they couldn't retrieve a nose, they couldn't retrieve an ear. And yet they made the best of it and had just lovely hearts open to everyone to welcome. It was really amazing.
Wow. That is really amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think one of the most difficult things to do is to find resolve without closure. It's definitely, I think, in any area, whether it's relationships or something that happened or, whatever. And I really think that is such a spiritual journey to take, because the only resolve one gets there is really with God, and that's where I found, in certain instances, is the only place I found my peace. And it's like, what I found there is, it's that surrendering. I think so many of us want to know, we want answers, we want to have clarity, we want the truth from someone else's mouth, right? Or whatever it might be. But very often we don't get that. And for me, what I've found in those situations is through prayer and meditation, I really find that closeness of spirit, and the peace that brings me makes the need to know, it dissolves. And then at some point, God gives me the insight that at the right time, the information will surface. The truth always surfaces.
Yeah.
And with that, I found peace. And then always it comes to me. It's insane, actually, how the truth finds its way. Or after 5 years, someone will suddenly pop out of the blue and apologize for something that I had so little peace with then. I couldn't sleep at night because of some of those things. But once I found that peace with God spiritually, I was able to let go. And this is in many instances. I won't say many, many, but quite a few, And the more I've understood that, the more I'm able to do it. So I don't even complain in God's ears anymore. I don't. I think God must be so sick of me complaining. I like just go, okay, all right, I know that in time it's going to come up. So right now I'm just letting go and finding my peace in that way. It's very difficult, though.
Yeah.
I see that a lot.
Yeah, it is hard. And to think too that, I think of how life has seasons, and the Lord puts us in people's lives, for a reason, a purpose.
Right.
Sometimes we want to be that all-encompassing purpose. Like we want to be the one that plants the seeds and waters and weeds and prunes and sees that seed come to fruit, to be able to harvest that fruit. But sometimes we're not that all in all. the Lord may have us in somebody's life just to plant or just to
Right.
water or just to prune. And, that can make us feel like things have been left undone, that we haven't
Exactly.
accomplished everything. Um,
Exactly.
but, all along, he may not have intended us to do that. So,
Yeah. But of course, with our humanness, we tend to cling or get dependent or whatever it might be. We find that there's this beautiful saying that says God sends people into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. It's exactly what you're saying. In that moment to prune or be pruned, or in that time where you've needed extra support or whatever. You know what I find so strange sometimes, and it's not even strange anymore. If I'm like, especially lately with my mom, when she's been going through really rough times, and I know some of us here can certainly identify with that, man, there's nothing that takes its toll more emotionally on me than that, because I feel so powerless to do anything. And of course, she's my mother. I see her getting old. I see her getting frail. I feel helpless. And all I have is prayer. And then it's amazing, like a friend that I haven't spoken to in 5 years will suddenly message me. How you doing, Shanti? What's up? And then just for 2 or 3 hours, we'll be chatting on WhatsApp or something. And and then, okay, well, it's been so good to chat to you. Let's not make it 5 years again. And it's amazing how that person, just the conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. In fact, I don't even tell her about my mother because that's just weighing me down right now. I talk to her about other things that are fantastic in her life and funny things or whatever. That lifts the mood. And that for me is kind of like how I find often, you know, just that person will come in for that moment just to support for 2 hours, and then you through the worst, and then suddenly nothing looks that doom and gloom anymore. Suddenly my mom walks out and she's smiling. I'm going, oh, okay, well, you're looking better. Yes, I'm feeling much better. I had a nap. Oh, that's fantastic. Stuff like that. So I don't know. We must always look at these things.
Yeah, that was good. John, did you have something you wanted to share?
If you don't mind. Yes, I was phoned in 23 in Geneva, and they said, I have to go and meet this lady from Cape Town. So when I went to meet her, she told me a story, and she said she's got 3 daughters, and the middle daughter was born with cerebral palsy and couldn't eat or couldn't talk or walk. And the doctor said, just park her, get on with your life. You've got more to do. She said, I can't do that. So she went into a garage and she made a mobility device herself. And she made another one for somebody else. So I went to meet her and we went around Geneva and so on and so forth. But what I was introduced to was the whole ecosystem around the disabled. And we set up I have an NGO called Abaluzi, which is Zulu for shepherds, because so it's the old guys get together to help the communities. So I was told, I looked at this and we looked at an anagram and said Abaluzi, focal point for disabled. And then I was told off by this lady, Shona, and she said, no, they're not disabled, they're PWDs, they're people with disabilities. So you must talk about people first. So we looked at this, and we also, our association, we put together 12 community gardens, and they're feeding about 15,000 people a month and so on. Yeah. But what that's got, that association we're working with, is an outreach into all the suburbs around the city. And so when I looked at the disabled, and what Shona introduced me to was, the therapists and the NGOs and all these sort of things. So we then came back and I interested my other elders, and they said, yeah, let's do something. So one of the ladies was the secretary for an NGO. So we did an outreach with a research document to about 50 NGOs and schools, and 20 of them responded. And we said, do you want to set up a focal point for the disabled? What I meant by a focal point, told them and gave them a presentation, was we don't actually want to help the disabled. We want to help you to become more effective and efficient in helping the disabled. So just going back to what Shanti was saying just now, the different setups, what we've seen, we actually launched, we got about 12 of the 3 elders, 2 patrons. We got about 10 or 11 of the people from these institutions who are now serving on, as of last Monday, the founding committee for the focal point, the Abaluzzi focal point for people with disabilities, right? It's a long acronym, and that started last Monday. But what really got me was suddenly they hadn't had the opportunity to work together, to share things. I'm talking about the institutions and what we've done is deployed the network, and we started just 2 WhatsApp groups, one official that we can now talk to them and one for them to interact with. And then I went and got hold of a disabled guy who'd had a stroke. Excuse me. and he taught me about being disabled. He said we're all disabled in one way or the other, right? And so I made him a coordinator for all of this, and it's just taken off. But the joy, the first meeting was terrible because nobody turned up and all your work you've done, and suddenly it just broke out. And as I'm heading back to Switzerland this week, but I've got people I've left in charge who I've delegated to, and really the joy of watching these people put together stuff, and just to have, don't really like to use the word hope, right? But to suddenly there's an energy, and there's stuff being written on the WhatsApp group, and they're getting together and they're sharing the network, and it's really, really great. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, that's amazing how that works. And I like how you said that, and it's so true of things that, it can seem like there's all, everything's slow, you're waiting, and seems like nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden there's a breakthrough. And so just amazing hearing you talk about that. Throughout the years, I've done a lot of work with individuals with disabilities, and there's so much need there, and I love to hear what you guys are breaking forth with that. Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, chapter.
Can I just finish? Coming out of that one mobility device in her garage, she now manufactures 7,000 wheelchairs a year. Now, that's not your normal wheelchair that you can go and get this, because with those people, the spine doesn't work at all. So it's got to be, she or he's got to be held up properly, and so on and so forth. So 7,000 a year. She exports to 7 different countries from South Africa. She's now on the board of the World Economic Forum and all these sort of things. So yeah,
Wow.
it's quite a story.
Yeah, phenomenal, huh? Interesting. Yeah, it's there's so much with their rights too. There's so much that I don't even know how to even start with that. But you just were, as you were talking about the chairs having to be fitted and stuff. We had a gentleman that was completely paralyzed, from like mostly the lower torso and stuff, but also had a lot of cerebral palsy. But what was funny was we realized the one day, like there was an issue with the chair, and we had to put him on the floor, and all of a sudden he started combat crawling. And he was so excited, like he just was going, combat crawling, right? And we're like, well, why do we have him in the chair all the time? Like if he likes to, he likes to do that. And we had, those who oversee, they like to tell you what to do and what's right for these individuals. And they, we're like, oh no, no, like it's inappropriate. You can't have him on the floor and all this stuff. And we're like, why not? That's where he's happy. Like, why not let him get around and move himself, right? And so we had to advocate. We had to, file with the state and everything, get doctor's orders saying that he could, do that. We got special mats put on the floor so he wouldn't be, tearing his elbows apart and stuff like that. But it was funny how just that little, that change of things, like getting him out of the chair, letting him be who he was, getting around, it made such a huge change. And I applaud the efforts that you guys do to give people that freedom to move and get around.
Talking about freedom, my eldest daughter got in, she's in Australia, and her daughter, who's about 24 years old, they got involved in refereeing wheelchair rugby.
Oh,
Now,
wow. That would be quite a show, I'm sure.
I thought I could go along in my age and go and referee one of these things, but you got to run up and down and you got to take all these things. And I said to us, and they've been to Canada now. The last one was to
Mhm.
Finland and gone to Indonesia to train people, and Japan. They're all around the world.
Wow.
And I said, and what's happening on the field? I said, these guys are rough. She said, Dad, you should see what happens off camera. You're talking about flat out on the ground with mats and things and getting them back up again. Right. You can see what happens up. I said, I could well imagine. But, when you see,
Yeah.
and also be an international wheelchair rugby player, you've got to be quadriplegic. Right?
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
if you get better in two ups, you can't play anymore, but
Right.
guys, anyway, it's just a whole new world. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Very interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that. I haven't heard of the wheelchair. I've heard of you've got the disabled Olympics, you have different Olympics with wheelchairs, but I haven't heard of the rugby one, so I'll have to look into that. So, thank you. All right, so chapter 23, lines stretched out to breaking. She has rejoice, rejoice when all goes wrong. The chapel of Arbelon had no shutters or doors, yet above the low walls there was a frisee of tropical village landscapes, which was the out of doors. But as the evening service progressed, the soft curtains of the night enclosed us in a warm circle of new friends, a congregation of Filipino Christians. They had seemed on tiptoe to receive us when we had arrived yesterday at Arbelon, and they had made every arrangement for our comfort and for the recording of dialects spoken in this area. The pastor had seen to it that the Tibongo spokesmen, with their translations prepared in advance, were brought to us at the church's expense until our work there should be completed. Thursday evening, we had begun the recordings, getting a few messages in one language, and then without warning, our equipment had turned to stone. All day today, with its sweltering hours packed with intense and thorough cajoling, struggling, and laboring over the little red box, it had refused to respond. There was no more life in it, not a flicker. Yet as we listened now to the Filipino pastor, Mr. Crasp, there was a hint of pessimism in his public introduction of us. Instead, his words drew out our souls in even more rigid perseverance to hold on to hope against hope. In this critical technical dilemma, later, when I spoke to the congregation, I reminded them and ourselves of the miracles in the Bible record of blind eyes opened, of lame made to walk, and of the dead raised. Although there was no case in sight of dead equipment being brought to life, we were at our rope's end as far as this was concerned, and it did seem hopeless. Mr. Crasp was a small man with smooth, little, even features and shiny black hair cut in a modern style. He was always neatly dressed, looking like a gentleman just stepped out of a bandbox. Now his words were a little sudden, arousing cheer, heard in a split second before the retrieve or loss when the ball is fumbled 1 yard off the goal line. After our work here for 20 years, the Lord has brought us a new weapon through the work of which two ladies from America. I call it the gospel atom bomb. Now there will be no town or hillside burial that may not hear the message. Aberlon was the hub of the large Tabangou area, where heathen witchcraft prevailed in a form so treacherous that the Christians who went out among the tribes must be careful lest he have his food poisoned at the command of the spiritual guardian of the burial. But among the Christians here in Aberlon, there was nothing lacking in their vision for the use of native language records among these pagan people. They knew of their responsibility also. According to Deuteronomy 15:11, thou shalt open thy hand wide unto thy brother, to the poor and to the needy in the land. Yesterday we had taken the only other road out of Port-au-Prince. It was skirted with 30 kilometers of Awahig penal colony, where we had seen the conflicts dressed in their orange pajama uniforms, like a species of tropical bird. Some were tilling fields or planting rice, others were climbing coconut trees or building houses. Here was a large acreage of fishing fields for language records in many dialects. In a bus constructed for petite Filipinos, we had sat hunched in a new fashion of knots per hour as we trundled along till we reached Aberlon at last. After 4 hours sitting jackknifed in the little wooden bench, we had waited until the bus was nearly emptied of its passengers, and before we had gotten off, Mr. Casp had jumped onto the bus and greeted us, taking charge of baggage and directing us to a nice, roomy frame house of the Filipino family where the church had made arrangements for us to stay. Excuse me. Oh, I didn't think you would be so old, Mr. Crasp had said to me. And turning to Anne, he looked a bit pale. She looked a bit pale herself. He queried, "Isn't she too old to be traveling so much?" Anne, trying to come to my rescue and feeling the shock a bit herself, for we were the same age, answered light-heartedly, "Oh, you mean Joy? She isn't so old. You have many Americans who get quite gray, quite young." But to our dismay, his answer was, "Yes, I know about the hair, but the face. You cannot miss the face. You cannot fool me on the face." Perhaps the face of us betrayed something of the physical harrying that we had come as part of the tactical part of the overall conflict, so characteristic of Palawan. The recurrent tropical illnesses, the rugged travel, the languid burden of high humidity in the equable heat, but these were merely nuisance attacks and faded into nothing when we felt the keen pain of vital warfare. The recording machine was our valuable spot. If it could be killed, we were adrift and completely frustrated. Aberlon had swiftly become the very peak of desperate struggle, to the breaking point of the strain we had experienced in the days that had stretched out from the first hard-taken languages of Quran. There we had finally gotten each message, but only piece by piece, at the conspicuous witchery of the recorder that had intermittently dead and then alive again. "And let's try these tubes again. and we would replace tube after tube with new ones from our reserve supply. And I always test the connections, Anne argued with the rigid, unexplainable, for which we were struggling, twisting, fading to discover a way of escape. I thought I had spotted the trouble there last time, and then it would be, now try it again. I would turn the knob to its record position and speak into the mic, no volume, light flicker, turning the knob to play back, releasing the tape again and listening, but not a sound would come out of the amplifier. We worked doggedly at it together or separately, and for a long while with the help of the third technician from Aberlon. But the time came when we knew that there was nothing more that could be done about it. We had been playing incessantly, of course, and often finding recourse in the premises. Our faith clinched on to them resolutely as it grew harder and harder to hang on. Late Friday evening, and some time after the service at chapel had ended, we had finally faced the reasonable necessity that we must leave Aberlon tomorrow when the bus should come at noon. Our chief informant, Mr. Padpad, could not stay longer than Sunday anyway, and Aberlon Church was insisting upon bearing the expense of our visit, and they refused to allow us to pay. We could not remain longer to inconvenience our hospitable hosts for the total result of nothing. Leaving tomorrow, well, we must go for a drive just so that we can see our town. Our kindly sympathetic friends had said, but when tomorrow came to be our last day at Aberlon, for we knew we could not return, nor would there be any possibility of our getting these languages at any other time than this, we knew that we would not take the drive around town. Saturday morning came dragging its feet and breathing heavily. We were softly humming the tune of Rejoice Evermore. Rejoice, rejoice when all goes wrong. Rejoice, rejoice when it's all day long. Put faith in God's promise, lift high the song. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Encouraging each other with Bible promises and with choruses, as we started to pack our suitcases to leave, we both suddenly spoke, as with one breath. I can't feel free to go. It looks so hopeless. Nevertheless, God is able. This was a time that we were not to rejoice and at the same time feel at peace about leaving with the task undone. Everyone in this town realizes we are leaving defeated. Yet we have spoken to them publicly and told them of God's power to work miracles. And now, when the souls of thousands of pagans are at stake, we must not let go short of victory. We would be dishonoring to God. We could not relax and give it up at this point. Feeling the pull of the line stretched taut and the tugging of opportunities that were within the hair's breadth of capture, we went out of the house, and with 3 others joining us, we entered the wide open chapel and knelt in earnest prayer. It was our purpose not to take no for an answer. We spent 2 hours there, one after another, praying, not eloquent prayers, but simply crying out from our hearts to our Heavenly Father to help us. Yet there was a persistence that would not be reconciled with the denial of the petition. The issues of battle were plain. We claimed the victory for the last round and the final conquest because here we felt it could not be otherwise. Flooding our hearts with new hope and impetuous were the words, O Lord, thou art my God. I will exalt thee. I will praise thy name, for thou hast done wonderful things. Thy counsels of old are faithfulness and truth. Thou have been strength to the poor, a strength to the needy in the distress, a refuge from the storm, a shadow from the heat, when the blast of the terrible ones is as a storm against the wall. Isaiah 25, 1 and 4. One by one we prayed, placing our strong reasons before God and seeking wisdom until we were satisfied. There was no more to be said. We rose from our knees and started back once more to the would-be studio in the parlor of the Pengress house. It was almost bus time by now. The thought of a particular thing to do had come to me, but I was waylaid, and Anne reached the mini dike first. She tried what she had also suddenly felt directed to do. Opening up the recorder, she removed a certain new tube and discovered that it was cracked. Quickly replacing it with another, which fortunately we had brought, she tested the recording once more. I came into the room breathless with a high ladder steps. Joy, listen! Speaking out clear and strong was the voice of Thursday evening's recordings. Miracle. We carried the mini dike in triumph to the chapel, the village of Aberlon singing with us, and immediately we set up the work of recording. The bus came at noon, only about 10 minutes later, but it went away without us. Message after message was captured by the tape as we worked steadily all afternoon and evening. Up at 6:30 the next morning, we recorded more Tabangu scripts, one after another. We must leave at noon today. We could barely finish if we hurried. What time is the bus due? Oh, this afternoon or noon. Our last record was being made while friends watched down the road for the bus. The race against time became breathless now, and adding to the suspense was the occasional fade-out symptom of the recorder. Every now and then our attention was also teased a little, and then relaxed by the words, "The arrival of the bus is not yet." What a relief when we had finished and it was still not yet. When the bus did come and stand at our corner, it had to wait a few minutes until we had closed up the recorder and hastily snatched up our things. Waving goodbye to the friends that stood by watching with happy smiles, we sank back on the bench seats with a sentence, which was both a sigh and a shout at one utterance. So tired, but wasn't it wonderful? As we joggled along our way back to Puerto Princesa, a friendly Filipino companion commented about the ride. This is like a ferry wheel, and then now you can write that in your diary. I did have a little blue diary open, and when there was a chance as the bus would stop, I confided in it these few lines under the word Aberlon. My faith has been stretched these days, but it did not snap. There were many times when we thought things should be different. By faith, we knew that all was right, but just by faith, we lived in the Word. And let yesterday and today for a few hours was like relief from pain. No matter how we grow our faith and experience, God is careful to see that we don't slip back or settle down. He's interested in pushing us off every nice, dowry nest so that our faith and praise wings might grow strong. Later, we sent an SOS to prayer helpers at home, and we felt that it was as urgent as shrilling as the ship's alarm to summon the entire combat crew to mend their situations and stand by for concerted fire upon the enemy. In Palawan, the prize was continually in danger of slipping away in the opposition when we were on the verge of securing it. My dear praying friends, everyone is aware that the time for missionary effort here is very short, and with world conditions as they are, it is only a matter of months. Even now, the heart of missionaries are sickened by the calls from many directions which they cannot answer. They welcome us with open arms as we come with new means of speeding up their work. One native pastor, who is the only preacher going out to do evangelistic work among the large pagan tribes, said to his local congregation, "We have labored alone these many years. We have prayed that help might come. Now God has been good to us and has sent these women to bring us a new weapon of warfare, the atomic bomb of the gospel in the form of records to the dialects of the people." He went on to say that when he was able to get to the heathen Tabangu people, which was seldom, The seed he had sown on his previous visit had already been snatched away by the enemy. They cannot read, but through the records they can keep on listening. The people from far and near will come in to hear. 10 phonographs will be sent soon to this area, and the records we made will be completed in a short time. We cannot cable each of you and request special prayer in times of terrific conflict, but we are hoping this letter will convey our need with the same urgency. We out here in the Philippines feel the need of prayer reinforcement in order to complete the work before us, so we are appealing to you to join to us. Some of you will feel led to give a day to this, either alone or in groups, but we trust you will all personally accept this plea of your own responsibility in behalf of the unreached millions on these islands. All right, and there we're going to leave off today, but I want to give a few minutes before we end in prayer for people to share about that chapter. That was interesting. It certainly resonated with me, the trials that, we call it the 11th hour, it seems like you war and war and war, and it feels like you've wasted all this time. You can't get things done. You can't get ahead. There's just so many trials that hit you all at one time, and all of a sudden everything breaks through at that 11th hour, but it feels so rushed, and it's interesting how the Lord waits until that last hour. But feel free, if you had some things to share, go ahead and share those. I see a comment here. It says, "Thank you, Jessie. That was so relatable." Yes, our Lord always comes through. That he does.
The 11th hour is always, I don't know, I think it's a human condition. For some reason, we wait until the last minute. We love procrastinating, don't we? And that
Yeah.
last minute, boom, then suddenly everything shifts. It's actually very rewarding.
Right? Yeah, I always wonder why that is, It's like, why couldn't I have had the whole day?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But isn't it interesting, just as human beings, like I've found so often working with people over the years that for some reason, we seldom respond to the gentle nudges that God gives us, right? I mean, if there's change that needs to happen in our lives, God is always going to gently nudge us initially, by just showing us little things or whatever, changing your eating habits or losing some weight or doing some exercise, whatever. And then suddenly, boom, it takes a heart attack or a car accident or a divorce for people to suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I need to make some changes in my life. I just hope
Yeah,
we wake up sooner rather than later nowadays.
right.
Interesting. We're an
Yeah.
interesting bunch. We really are.
Certainly are. All right, John, did you have something you wanted to share with that?
No, the last 2-3 years has just been full of 11th hours. But
Yeah.
but the story which helped us when we set out was, I saw this thing 2:00 in the morning. There was a TED talk by a Muslim girl in New York. How to start an international organization in 3 steps. And I just had this guy come to me and he said, what am I going to do in my old age? And when I was the head of personnel in a factory, the guys used to come off and go on pension, and the average time they lived was 9 months. Because if you've got nothing to do, right? You know, you say, oh, you can go and fish or do something or something. And we just found, so that's why we put together the Abalusi, the elders, and we've given them something to do. And so when I first put it together, this man, I taught at the executive of a 5-star hotel, and the HR guy came to me and said, what do I do in my old age, you know? So I said, well, the only thing I know is I put together a senior executive club when I was director of a chamber, and it really worked. So let's try it, right? So I then saw this Muslim girl's little TED talk. So she used to walk around New York with her, you know, her Muslim outfit on and a burqa and so on, and get assaulted. But she knew self-defense. So she was able to give her own back. So then she thought, well, what do I, you know, maybe some other girls would like to do the same thing, right? So the 3 steps were start with what you know. She knew self-defense. Start with who you know. So she got her friends and they started to go. And the third one was start with the joy. So after you've done your exercise, everything, then you have your cup of tea or your beer or whatever it is, but you get together. And I used to do the same thing with the chamber. After the meetings, get together, have a drink, whatever. And that's when stuff was shared. So when I came here to South Africa and I went around my contacts, and I came to Durban where I didn't have my contacts. My contacts were in a place called Pietermaritzburg. So I came here and I put my 1-pager up and I said that we want to set this up. We want to do all these things. And they all said, oh, very nice, John, but I won't be joining you. And I thought, hey, so who do I know? So I went to who I knew, my network. And the Lord works in mysterious ways, I tell you what, because, you know, I put this 1-pager out to my friend. I phoned him up. I said, breakfast. I phoned another friend up. I said, lunch. So breakfast, I got that. And I showed him the 1-pager. And I just wanted feedback. And he said, John, this is looking good. I'm about to retire. I want to join. I said, I didn't ask you to join. It doesn't matter. I just want to join. And next one, I want to join. And then next one got me from Cape Town. He said, while you're messing around in Switzerland doing nothing, I'll run the show. It needs some structure. And it all fell into place.
This point, yeah.
Fell into place. Like, you don't believe it yet. When I left, you know, it just wasn't there. And it was just a question of those 3 steps were so important, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, the joy is also, you know, we can put in a lot of spiritual joy as well, too. But just, you know, what do you know? Who do you know? And then hit them all with the joy. And it's so important. Just from a Muslim girl's little TED talk at 2:00 in the morning, you know.
Yeah. I love that. That's great. And that's what they were saying, you know, in the book too, is, you know, when things are bad, rejoice, you know, at all times and just keep rejoicing. So she was,
Absolutely.
you know, absolutely right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and we'll close off in prayer. Lord, we thank you for the joy set before us, Lord. You give each of us such good works to be a part of, and we thank you that we don't have to just sit around doing nothing, purposeless or living a life without um, any um, any meaning, Lord. Even in the down times, Lord, you are working, you are getting things ready, you are setting things into place. And help us to be mindful in those times, to be in prayer, to be breaking through the joy that is set before us. And let us take those times to rejoice and um, instead of being so overburdened with everything that seems to be wrong, let us look at all the things that are before us that are just needing the harder work, the pressing through, Lord. Work on our fortitude, our endurance, our perseverance, our long suffering. Build those deep characteristics within us, Lord, because they are the foundations of joy. And we ask that that joy would break forth in our lives. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everyone.
Jessie, thank you so much again. And thank you everyone for joining us. Loving the story, I have to say, and I'm glad you all are. And then we look forward to seeing you guys again next month. I was going to say next week, in a month from now, for part 8. How many parts do we still have, Jess? Approximately.
Quite a bit. I would say at least probably 3, maybe 4.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's a long one, but worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you very, very soon.
Thank you.